Hello everybody, this is Katje, and tonight what I'd like to do in celebration of the end of the summer and the harvest moon is read some late summer poetry, some verses by the great German poet Trakl. I'm going to read them in English translation, and I'm also going to read some selections from a commentary on Trakl's poetry by the German philosopher Martin Heidegger. And I'm going to say a few things about that just in passing, just off the top of my head, sort of thinking out loud. But tonight I'm wearing one of my summer bikinis, and I hope that everybody had a great summer, a wonderful summer, and so maybe tonight we can say goodbye to the summer and hello to the fall by reading some of the poetry and just enjoying it. So let me take a seat, and I have marked some of these. I have a piece of paper here that I've used to mark some of the page numbers in my book. So, again, the poet's name is Trakl, and these are just several verses that I thought you might find enjoyable. The first couple of verses that I'm going to read evoke the late summer. You might think of September, where the summer is turning into the fall. So Trakl says at one point, "Oh, how still is a walk down the blue river's bank, to ponder forgotten things, when in leafy boughs the thrush called to a strange thing to go under." And he also says this, "So quiet has the green summer grown, and through the silvery night there rings the footfall of the stranger. Would that the blue wild game were to recall his past, the music of his ghostly years." So that's very beautiful. Another set of verses I wanted to read have to do with a figure that recurs in Trakl's poetry. It's called Ellis, who's a young boy who died young. He died early. This is a recurring figure that you can find in Trakl's poetry. And he says things like that. The following about Ellis. "The dark shape of coolness ever billows or follows the wanderer over the footbridge of bone, and the boy's hyacinth voice softly reciting the forest's forgotten legend. Softly your forehead bleeds ancient legends, the dark augury of the flights of birds. O Ellis, how long have you been dead?" Now Heidegger says something very interesting about this figure of Ellis. He says, "The boyishness in the figure of the boy Ellis does not consist in the opposite of girlishness. His boyishness is the appearance of his stiller childhood. That childhood shelters and stores within it the gentle twofold of sex, the youth, and the golden figure of the maiden." So Ellis is kind of, one might say, an androgynous character, or maybe a better way of describing it is that he has both this male side, because he is a boy, but he also has this feminine side. He's described as a maiden, or having a kind of girlishness about him that's unified in this, what Heidegger uses the term twofoldness, or this twofold unity in the stranger, in Ellis. So I like that in particular as someone who's a cross-dresser and also a bit of a transgender individual, because those two things, the male and the female, are coming together as different sides of this boy, this person Ellis, in one unity. So I think that's very interesting. Now, another poem, a beautiful poem that Trakl wrote about Ellis is another one called "To One Who Died Young." And these are just a couple of stanzas from that I thought you might enjoy. "But he yonder descended the stone steps of the Mönchberg, a blue smile on his face, and strangely ensheathed in his stiller childhood, and died. And the silver face of his friend stayed behind in the garden, listening in the leaves or the ancient stones. Souls sang of death, the green decay of the flesh, and it was the murmur of the forest, the fervid lament of the animals. Always from twilight towers rang the blue evening bell." So this is again describing the boy Ellis, who descended the stone steps of the Mönchberg and died, became strangely ensheathed in his stiller childhood. It's a very beautiful passage that Heidegger uses. Another one where he's describing Ellis, that Trakl uses. Another verse that Trakl has about this is, "Silent the myrtle blooms over his dead white eyelids." So that's a wonderful image of this sort of masculine but also feminine figure of Ellis. Another theme that we find in some of Trakl's poetry is his interest in God or the holy, and often when Trakl is talking about that, he uses blue, the color blue, as a key or an indicator that he has the holy in mind. So let me just give you a few very nice examples of that. One is, he'll say things like this, "And in holy blueness shining footfalls ring forth. The holiness of blue flowers moves the beholder. Animal face freezes with blueness with its holiness." And so you see him using that blueness to describe the presence of the holy or God as he understands it. I want to come back to that in just a minute. I'm trying to find some other things that might help to make this point. At one point he talks about the holy blueness. He talks about the holy blueness, the blue wild game and the holy blueness, and another place where he doesn't use blue but is clearly thinking about God is where he says, "There always sings upon black walls God's solitary wind." Or another places where he talks about God is when he writes this verse, "Infinite torment that you hunted down God, gentle spirit, sighing in the cataract in the waving fir trees." So here Trakl is preoccupied with the nature of God or with God's presence or the presence of the holy. And Heidegger says something about this that I want to take issue with. So let me come back to that. Let me just basically summarize what Heidegger's point is. There are a lot of times in Trakl's poetry where, as I mentioned, he not only talks about the holy or about God, but he also seems to he uses Christian imagery. There's a poem called "A Winter Evening" where he uses the image of bread and wine, which obviously is a Christ-like image. Now Heidegger wants to say that to judge the Christianity of Trakl's poetic work, one would have to give thought about, above all, to his last two poems, Lament and Grodeck. And so Heidegger is very skeptical. He doesn't want to rush to judgment and attribute to Trakl some kind of Christianity immediately. I think that's okay, but then he goes a little bit further than that. He says, their discussion, that is, the discussion of these poems, calls for a kind of thorough thinking to which neither the concept of a metaphysical nor those of a church-based theology are adequate. And it goes on to make clear, Heidegger goes on to make clear that he doesn't really think that Trakl's poetry has anything, even when it's talking about holiness or the blue holy or things like that it has anything to do with Christianity. He'll say, Heidegger says things like that. Why does he, Trakl, instead name the sister's swaying shadow and call her the greeting one? Why does the song end with the name of the unborn grandsons and not with the confident hope of Christian redemption? Why does the sister in Trakl's poetry appear also in the other late poem, Lament? Why is eternity called there the icy way? Is this Christian thinking? It is not even Christian despair. So clearly Heidegger thinks that Trakl's poetry really doesn't have anything to do with Christianity. Now, I want to say something like this. I think the problem here is that the minute that Trakl starts talking about the holy or God in any way, then nothing really is ruled out. And I understand that we don't want to rush to judgment. I agree with Heidegger that we don't want to rush to judgment and say, well, this means that basically all Trakl is doing is writing poetry, Christian devotional poetry, or trying to express the Christian doctrine of the church or something like that. I don't think we ought to jump to conclusions there, but by the same token, I think it's important not to jump to the opposite conclusion and say, well, Trakl's discussion of the holy and of the blue holiness and of God when it comes up in his poetry, it doesn't have anything to do with Christianity. We don't really know. I don't think that we should prejudge that issue either way, either by saying, well, this is just Christian devotional poetry, or with Heidegger, well, this doesn't really have anything to do with Christianity at all. I think that that question needs to be left open, and that a more careful consideration of this would maybe be helpful before we drew any conclusions. Let me just conclude by reading this last poem, so an excerpt from one last poem by Trakl. And I think this is called Springtime of the Soul. So it goes like this. Darker the waters flowed round the lovely games of the fishes, hour of morning and silent sight of the sun. Something strange is the soul on earth, ghostly the twilight, bluing over the mishewn forest, and a dark bell long tolls in the village. They lead him to rest. Silent the myrtle blooms over his dead white eyelids. There's Ellis again. Softly murmur the waters in the declining afternoon. On the banks, the green wilderness darkens joy in the rosy wind. The gentle song of the brother by the evening hill. So that's beautiful, beautiful poetry, and I think it's a fitting way for us to say goodbye to summer and hello to the fall. That's what I wanted to do this evening, and just do a little thinking out loud. So let me just take a few more turns here. So say goodbye to the summer, and I hope that everybody is doing well. Again, I'm happy to wear my bathing suit, my bikini. I enjoy wearing that. It makes me feel very sexy, and it's very comfortable. I hope that we will have a chance to do some more talking about various things, especially in connection with transgender and transsexual and cross-dressing issues. But until then, I wish everybody a very good night, a very restful night, and I look forward to talking to you next time. This is Katje saying good night.